So welcome to this table event. My name's Sarah. I work for Salt, and a pleasure to be here tonight or today with you. And we have the owner from Insta account, Christians Who Curse Sometimes, with us. And we're really excited to talk about such an important topic, talking about mental health. In particular, focusing on the experiences that were talked about in their recent podcast about a Christian living with bipolar disorder. So we'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts. We'd love people to share if you're willing and able. Please just make sure that your microphone permissions are enabled and that you unmute yourself if we invite you up. But please put your comments, your questions in the chat as well, and we'll try to answer as many of those as possible. But let me hand over to Christians Who Curse Sometimes to introduce and to talk us through this topic.
Thank you, guys. We've been doing this for a couple weeks now, and I want to be honest. I know a lot of times the titles of these events can make you think you're talking to someone who has it, but I am not bipolar myself. This podcast that I launched is called the I'm a Christian Who podcast, and it's sharing stories of Christians with real struggles. And we just released our fourth episode, which is the story of Tommy, who's a Christian who has bipolar disorder. And the interesting thing why I think it's great to talk about this on Salt is Tommy is married. And if you listen to the episode, he talks about a lot of his anxieties with opening up about his mental health while he's dating. And I'm not going to lie to you, like some of it was good and some of it was not so good, but he is married now. And he talks about kind of some of the issues that have come up in his marriage and also some of the safeguards that they've, put in place and how they've created a marriage that can thrive even despite, his bipolar disorder. So I really want the conversation today. I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about Tommy, but I really want to hear a lot from you guys because, mental health is something where there was a huge stigma and there still is a huge stigma, but I think we live in a society now where people are becoming more open to talk about this stuff. I am married to a woman who does have anxiety, and she's very open about that. And that's something that has its ups and downs. And I think dating and pursuing a marriage with mental health is such a big topic. So if anybody's willing to raise their hand and come forward and kind of talk about, any stories you've had, any questions you have about dating and relationships when it comes to this, I'd be glad to bring you up on stage to talk about it. But Tommy's story is really great because Tommy's someone who has followed my Instagram page, which is Christians Who Curse Sometimes on Instagram. And he and I have had a couple discussions over the years with him just kind of sharing his story. And he used to tell me all the time about the stigma of bipolar disorder specifically, because I think people get this weird image of what bipolar disorder looks like. And a lot of that, he expressed this too, is by the media, because there are movies about it, there are characters that have it. And because of how the media and society is structured, we tend to only hear about the stories that are the negative stories. We hear about the manic episodes. We hear about the low points and the harm that people with bipolar disorder, have caused. But he really wanted to shine a light on how different it is, to live that experience, because he's had a very similar experience that a lot of Christians have. And I'm not sure how many of you have had a similar experience, but he said that a lot of his mental health struggles were dismissed. And he was told, the answer is, well, he's got a demon in him. He isn't praying enough, all of those things that, while they might be true, just the essence of being told that when you struggle with your mental health is so dismissive towards the reality of what you're feeling that it can actually cause those mental health issues to get worse and to make people feel more alone. Because when someone says like, well, it's your fault, it's you not praying enough, it's you not doing this, it's because you have a demon in you, all that stuff. It's so dismissive, instead of having someone kind of metaphorically put their arm around you and say like, hey, I don't understand what you're going through. I want to learn more about what it's like to be you. And I think if we have that attitude more as Christians, we can understand mental health, because the church is behind with talking about mental health. And I looked up some research, but before the episode, to make sure. And I think it was something about 60 to 70% of Christians say they want the church to talk more about mental health, and they're not. And I just see, Jody just shared in the chat that she's definitely heard that you can't be a Christian and be on antidepressants. Mariano wrote the same thing. I mean, I think he said earlier that he has, that he has bipolar disorder. He said medication helps him. Jesus needs help carrying the cross. I see my doctors and medication as a way to help me carry my cross. See, this is what's fascinating, that I grew up Christian, and I for sure heard those things growing up where, medication, Jesus can heal all and God can heal all. And if you just pray hard enough, he'll swoop down from the crowds or from the clouds and cure you of your mental health. But I think the thing that is interesting is God has done so many things on this earth to help us in relationship with each other. And the one thing that I think is so beautiful is God has blessed, doctors with the ability to create these medicines and to study our beautifully complex bodies to find ways to help heal. But also he's blessed us with therapy and people who understand the mind. And I'll be honest, it's 3:00 here in Central Time. I'm going to see my therapist, right after we're done with this, because that's my weekly appointment. And because I didn't go for the longest time. I'm just going to be honest, because I believed a lot of those stigmas. I didn't have a big mental health struggle when I was a teenager, but the damage was done because I heard what people were saying about therapy. I heard that therapy was for the weak. I heard that therapy is for the people with extreme issues, or for a very small percentage of people. I was never told that therapy was healing. I was never told that therapy was something that can be preventative, that therapy is something that can help me grow. And the thing that changed me was I went to a therapist for the first time, and I remember being so frightened and thinking, I'm worried he's going to think I'm crazy, like that there's something wrong with me, that I'm coming here when I was going for a particular issue I was struggling with. And it felt so freeing to be able to sit with somebody and share these things, and not just anybody, but somebody who understood the mind, but also who understood how important my faith was to me. Because the thing that I was so afraid of with seeking mental health help was finding somebody who would be respectful of my faith, but not necessarily be dismissive of it. Because I think so much of faith can be that pray about it mentality, that I didn't want to pay for a therapist who was just going to tell me, well, great, I'm listening to you now, go pray about it and read your Bible more. Like, I wanted somebody to understand my faith, but also give me those practical things to help me out. And I will say, I hear this a lot. I'll bet a lot of you are thinking this in your head if you've never been to therapy before, is how do I find a therapist like that? And the thing is, regardless of if you have, something like a bipolar disorder that should be treated. I mean, granted, every mental health issue has a spectrum, and there are all sorts of people who have more severe versions of bipolar disorder and less severe, and same with everything else, with depression and anxiety. But when it comes to finding a therapist, the first thing you need to look for is a licensed therapist. There are so many life coaches out there. There are so many Christian counselors out there. And yes, they can be very good at what they're doing. But what you need to find is a licensed therapist. And I want to tell you why. When something is unregulated, like Christian counseling, I believe it can help a lot of people. But you're trusting that person instead of trusting a process. And the licensing process, to me, tells me that this person has gone through it. They're educated. They have a standard of practice that is going to help me. Frankly, I can call myself a Christian counselor and put an ad up today and say, hey, I can help you. And I have no training whatsoever. So I think that varies, so that there's more trust in doing that. The other thing that pushed me to going to therapy for the first time was somebody helped me separate it. And I think this was a very simple way. And then I'll get to some tips to finding a good therapist. They said, you go to the doctor when you feel physically ill. You should go to your pastor when you're feeling spiritually ill, and you should go to your therapist when you're feeling mentally ill. And I think that's a beautiful way to think about it, because if you confuse those three, you can end up causing more issues. Like, some pastors are fantastic at dealing with mental health issues. Some have zero training whatsoever. And it's really important to know the difference between those three. And when I started talking to my pastor more about spiritual issues and more about that, I found myself becoming more spiritually healthy. When I started talking to my doctor about physical things, I found myself more physically healthy. And when I started talking to my therapist about mental health issues, I found myself more healthy mentally. And I think, Jennifer is right with what she said in the chat. If you're physically ill, people send cards and ask how you are. Not so with mental illness. And in hospital, patients very rarely get visitors, which is sad. I think that's so true. So I want to give you guys some practical tips. And again, if anyone wants to share their story and experience with the church and anxiety or mental health and dating, anything like that, please raise your hand. I'll bring you up and have you share, because the power in this is stories. Because so much of what we go through, especially in mental health, we're led to believe that we're alone. When more people, when I looked and saw that 2.5% of Americans deal with bipolar disorder, that was a large number to me, because that means if you go to a church of 100 people, there's 2 people sitting alongside you who struggle with it, who very likely are not talking about it. So I want these people who are struggling to feel less alone by hearing these stories and knowing that people out there understand. So when it comes to finding a therapist that is helpful and good and also respectful of Christian values, the thing that I tend to look for, like I said, first is license. Make sure they are licensed. On most, I think psychologytoday.com has a really good filtering feature where you can go on and click that you want a faith-based counselor, someone who does Christian counseling. But the thing that I found helpful is most websites, when you Google therapists, you'll see a long list of things that they treat. How do you know they're licensed? Frankly, they will say that they're licensed. Thank you, Tia, for asking. Their website will say, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am a licensed addiction therapist. Like, they will say what they are licensed in. And if their profile does not say licensed anywhere in the language, it means they're not. So again, I'm not a therapist, I'm not an expert. That's just my experience. But the thing that I felt was really helpful for me was I looked for people who either got their undergrad or MBA or any of their education at a Christian institution. And the reason I looked for that was, even if they're not a Christian anymore, or even if they, are not a Christian counselor, by showing that they went to a Christian institution to get their education, it tells me that they have a respect for the faith. Even if they're not anymore, they understand it. Because I'll be honest, I had an experience for a while where I was going to a therapist who was a very good therapist, just not for me. And he listened when I talked about a lot of, my faith concerns and things like that, but he didn't have that kind of deep understanding of what it's like to be raised in a Christian home and go to a Christian college and be surrounded by Christians. That I didn't find it helpful. So I found a new one that now is fantastic. And to me, that's a great sign that if you have someone who's licensed and who is educated at a Christian institution. Obviously, there are great Christian counselors who have not gone to a Christian institution, but they struggle sometimes, I think, with posting that they're a Christian therapist, because it can make people think there's a stigma with Christian therapists where they think they're not going to provide those kind of helpful things, and that they're going to have that kind of pray about it attitude. So that's what I found was really helpful. So if anyone else has any tips, feel free to raise your hand and come up. But Evelyn, yeah, mental health issues are complex and very sensitive. I'm a recently single mother and the mother of a beautiful adult daughter with this issue can be devastating, affecting their loved ones. Exactly. I'm somebody who came from a house where mental health was just not discussed. It's not that it was like a deep issue for anyone. It just was not discussed. And I remember finding out when I was older that my sister had gone to a therapist for some time, and my parents had insisted on keeping it a secret. Thinking back, I think it would have been beneficial for me if that conversation had been more healthy and more conversational and helpful, to know that she had been there and to know that it wasn't a big deal, and that this is something, and to kind of open the door to me going, because something, yeah, thank you, Jody. That was kind of my experience too. So the decision my wife and I made in talking about, I have two kids now, is we decided that, we don't want our kids to grow up with a stigma that mental health is bad, or even to be put in that awkward moment when they're having some sort of crisis or wondering about their mental health, that they have to ask for therapy, because that's a very, very hard thing for a child to do, for a teenager to do, and even for an adult to do, to come to terms with realizing, like, hey, I need professional help here. So the thing that we decided we're going to do is, when our kids are 8, 9 years old, we want to take them to a therapist for a mental health checkup. And I think because we decided we want to treat it just like a any sort of physical checkup. Like, that's why we go to the doctor. Like, we just need the doctor to check on their bodies, make sure they're growing, make sure there's no red flags and something that we miss. And I want to take our kids to a mental health expert, or a licensed counselor, to meet with them. And if the therapist tells us, like, hey, your child needs to be seen more, needs more treatment, we're happy to do that and to trust that expert. Now, the other thing that we realize that this sets us up for, and I know that a lot of you as adults may not, because I had a great conversation with one of my good friends about this the other day, is mental health and therapy can be preventative instead of as a result of something. A lot of people end up going to therapy when they're in crisis. A lot of people in marriage relationships will go to marriage counseling when they're already in crisis. And I think there's something beautiful and respectful to yourself to start therapy before you need it. That way, when that crisis comes, because let's be honest, we are all humans, and we are all going to have some sort of tragedy or traumatic moment in our lives. And I would want a therapist to have an understanding of my life and background and how my mind works, so that when that trauma happens, he or she knows beautifully how to help me out in that moment. And to start that at a young age with our kids, we feel is very important to my wife and I. Like I said, it was not something, like, I had heard things that made it very stigmatized, therapy, but in our house, it just, like, wasn't talked about. It wasn't that it was talked about poorly by my parents. It just wasn't discussed. So I for sure probably needed it in high school. I went through a lot, and I probably could have benefited from it, but not even knowing that that was an avenue for me to go to, I didn't even know to ask for it. So I just think it's something where, even if you're respectful of it, we still have a stigma to it of, like, well, I want my kids to know they can ask for therapy when they're ready for it, or when they need it. But but then we put so much pressure on them to come forward to say, hey, I need it, when what they're dealing with might be something that involves you. All of us, like, I love to think that I'm the perfect dad with my kids, and that I'm raising them in the perfect way, but doesn't everybody feel like they're doing their best? But I'm sure something's going to happen where I might do something unintentionally that causes my children stress, and I know that puts them in an awkward position to come to me and say, like, hey, I need to talk to somebody else about this. That's a safe place. So to know that they have that venue, even if it's yearly, just an annual mental health checkup, that they have someone who they know is a safe place, that we trust as parents, and that we can go to, um, if there is a crisis, if something happens in their school, or with a friend, or with family, that we can say, like, let's just do this session. I think that's something that more people need to think about, is doing therapy before you need it. Because even if it's, just a couple sessions where your counselor is getting to know you, that when you have, I mean, the scary thing is, we all love to think that we're going to have these, beautiful lives. And what Mariano said, hopefully when he said, talk about not needing therapy, everybody likes to think that, we'll never need it, but unexpected stuff happens all the time. We all know from traumas in our lives that one day you wake up, and by the end of the day, you could be living a totally different life because of some sort of tragedy. And I would love to have somebody already on my team who's able to help with that. So, Evelyn also made a fantastic point. I think all couples should go into pre-marriage counseling. Personality issues and mental issues can help prepare couples to better support and understand each other. 1000% yes. And I think first of all, I want to say I don't think there's anything wrong with going to a pastor for premarital counseling. I also think it's good to go to a therapist for premarital counseling too. I think, marriage is something where, I assume since you guys are on Salt, you're all, in the dating world. And no matter how many times someone tells you this, it sounds like a cliche, and people love to roll their eyes at it, but marriage changes things. And no matter how long you've been with someone, how long, even if they end up living together for years and years, the act of getting married changes things. I knew a couple who was together for 5 years, super super close, and they divorced within 6 months of their marriage. And people don't expect that. They think we're just going to get married, we're going to be best friends forever, and yeah, we'll have our issues, but we'll make it through it. And all of that. But that premarital counseling, I will tell you, in my experience, has been super helpful because it brought forth issues that my young mind at the time was not thinking about. And I was 28 when I got married. 28, yeah, I was 28 when I got married. And our counselor brought up a lot of our family history, and our counselor predicted a lot of the issues that might be stressors for us in our marriage. And I remember thinking, like, yeah, I could see that happening potentially. And then when it actually happened, we were more prepared for that. Okay, we have someone wants to come up. Strong Nightjar would like to come up. Hi, who are you? Can I have a name to call you by? Oh, they went away. Never mind. So yeah, with premarital counseling though. Oh, here's Liz. Let's bring Liz up. Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hello, I'm all right.
Good. So did you have a question or a story?
I have a question. Um, Francisco has put an interesting thing in the chat about what bipolarism is, and I thought it was a chemical imbalance, or like something to do with chemically. Could you like explain what bipolarism is so that we can know?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I am no expert at bipolar disorder. I only did an interview with somebody who has that. I mean, if Francisco wants to talk about it, but from what I was told by him, because I asked him a similar question, is there are always varying levels of mental health. Like, people, I think, know that when it comes to anxiety. Like, there's small anxiety, and there's anxiety that's crippling, and that is a chemical imbalance that needs to be treated. Same thing with depression. There are varying levels of depression, but also it comes and goes. And he what he told me, and again, I don't know that this is true, but in his experience it was that it does kind of have hills and valleys. It has moments, and for some people, bipolar disorder is a huge struggle that affects their hour by hour life. And for other people, it's not as often, and it comes up rarely, but they still have it. So I don't know that I can give you an accurate answer to that, of if it is a chemical imbalance 100% of the time or not. But I think, yeah, M just wrote too, sometimes it is trauma induced. So there are a lot of varying levels of it, from what I understand, that we need as Christians to get out of our black and white box thinking of seeing it the way the media tends to portray it. You think of something like Silver Linings Playbook, that movie that came out that had a character with bipolar, and we can tend to define everybody with bipolar by one person that we've seen or known, when it is a spectrum. So we can't hold people to the expectations that we have of others, even if that's like someone we're close to. If you guys have siblings, or if you have bipolar disorder, we can even unintentionally hold other people that we meet to those standards, expectations, and even judgments sometimes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Does anybody else have any questions or stories that they want to share about mental health? Because I think the one thing that's interesting, that especially when it comes to dating, is, when do you talk about this? When you're dating, like, is this something you bring up while you're still in the app? Is it something you bring up on the first date? Is it something you bring up 3 dates? I would love to hear your guys' opinions in the chat on when you should bring up. I mean, it doesn't have to be a severe mental health disorder, but if you struggle with mental health, when would you want to know? Is that something you would want to know Yeah, let me see that. Rebecca said, unfortunately, when I got married, my ex-husband 25 years ago, mental health issues were not discussed openly and often spiritualized by the church. Thankfully, it's a different playing field now. Yeah, I think a lot of people, were dismissive, but also uneducated. I think because people didn't share those stories back then, and because it was stigmatized, it was harder for people to come forward and share, even with spouses, that they struggle with mental health. Yeah, Liz said, I think I'd want to know as soon as possible. Samuel said, within the first few dates, I'd like to know. I mean, also, I think it needs to be brought sooner, depending on the severity of the issue. So yeah, I think it's something that. Do you guys have any experiences with when someone has brought it up with you, or when you've brought it up with someone else, that you either felt they did a good job or not a good job with sharing it? Because I think there are ways to do it that are helpful and ways to do it that are not helpful. Here, Liz. Liz, did you have an experience with this?
Yeah, actually, recently, I've been talking to this man, and yeah, we had like a really open discussion about it, just last night, and he did it in like, he's such a good listener. Like, he just asked a few questions, and I found myself like telling him about my own experience with psychosis. So I had a psychotic episode last year, and yeah, it was just such a good thing to talk about. And then he talked about his own depression, and it was, yeah, I thought it was just really good because it just, you just feel closer to them. And yeah, it was just done really well.
So, Liz, I want to ask you, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't feel comfortable, but you just shared that you had, some psychosis last year. What is something that you wish more people would know about mental health?
mm, um I think I'd want people to know that it's hard to talk about. Like, I don't even really remember like what I went through. I know I remember bits and bobs, but that is so hard to talk about. But it needs to be talked about somehow. I don't know how, but yeah, I think people need to be aware of how hard it is to talk about, because you might not exactly remember, like how I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that, Liz. I think the interesting thing about having those discussions is the thing that we just want to do. Being a good listener when it comes to mental health. It's so easy for us to want to tell people what we think. And I think it's so easy to say things that we think are comforting when they're really exactly the opposite. And I think, from what Tommy said in his episode, but also in my experience, a lot of the people opening up about mental health is not an easy thing to do. There's no easy, quick way to bring it up. It doesn't tend to come up in conversation. So it's usually like one of those, hey, I have to talk to you moments. I have to tell you something about me that I don't know how you're going to react. So I think when you're on the receiving end of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're on the receiving end of that, the best thing you can do is ask questions, is ask them, like, what has your experience been? Get to know them instead of giving them advice or talking to them or talking at them. Ask them questions about what their experience has been like. Hi, Donald. How are you? Hi, Donald. Make sure you turn on your microphone permissions. Sometimes people forget that.
Or just hit your unmute button, Donald. It may be that you're muted still.
Oh, he's gone.
He's gone.
But yeah, I think when it comes to, these issues, is asking questions is about the kindest thing you can do, because I think people who are opening up about something tough in their life, they want to know that they're being heard, and they want to know that they're being understood and loved. And part of being loved is being fully known. And if you want to know somebody, oh, that's okay, Donald. If you want to come back up, if you fix it, just let me know. um, but yes, Samuel said it too. Yeah, asking questions is what I've found is most helpful with talking with friends with issues. Hi, Donald. How are you?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, from Australia. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
good.
nice
How
to
are you?
meet you, Donald. Is it early or late there? I don't know what the time difference is.
It's 7:30. 7:30.
Oh, well, good morning,
Yeah.
right?
Good morning.
Okay,
Yeah.
good
Good morning.
morning. Good morning, Donald. How's your day going so far?
Yeah. Not too bad. Just woke up. So
Good. What did you want to share?
um yeah. Look, I was quite a few over a decade ago. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not safe before that, and I was into New Age, and cut long story short, anyway, I the New Age teacher was talking about Jesus because they believe everything leads to God, and and people were praying for me, and yeah, so I came to know Jesus on the hospital bed.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I my brother was praying for me, and so when I ended up in hospital, my bro took me to the church, because and but yeah, how I got fixed up was yeah, the pastor prayed for me. There was miracles after miracles, and I remember being delivered from the stuff, the doors that I opened,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, subsequently I got off the program that they put me on, and even the antipsychotic drugs.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is I don't want to give off the impression that, prayer is unhelpful. I think prayer is an amazingly powerful thing. But I think the thing that I want to focus on too, in stories like yours is when Christians say, well, you're schizophrenic because you're not praying enough. That's what's dismissive. It's not taking away from the power of prayer. It's taking away from the relationship that Christ wants us to build by saying, like, well, this is your fault. Good luck. You're not praying enough. When we can sit with these people, get to know them, and just love them better.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, like the thing is, like, I do wonder the aspect of scriptures, schizophrenia kind of thing. Like, I'm wondering, does I mean, all sickness and disease, Jesus pretty much sums it up to say, the devil's here to kill, steal, and destroy, and so anything that sort of resembles that, we know it's not from God,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so the aspect of the whole multiple personality schizophrenia. I mean, it's like the guy from with legions.
Mm-hmm.
So apart from that, I don't know. Is there much sort of talked about in the Bible about mental health? Because obviously, Jesus' ministry consisted of healing people. Like that was the big chunk of it.
Oh, but let me tell you something that I learned that totally changed the way that I thought of the Bible and mental health. So before Jesus was going to be crucified, I think that this is something that most people who are familiar with the Bible know is he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says he was praying, so he was praying hard about it, so hard that he was bleeding. And the words that I think are so interesting in the Bible, and I wish I could quote them freely, but I'm not a pastor. It says something to the effect of Jesus was so sorrowful that he felt like his soul was dead. And the interesting thing is somebody who has depression described it, and they said that's how I describe when I'm feeling depressed. They say it feels like a soul death. So for anybody to argue that Jesus didn't have anxiety is not true, because when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was so anxious about what was about to happen that he was on his knees praying so hard that he was bleeding, and that he compared the feeling to his soul dying. That if that's not anxiety, then I don't know what is, because but some of what they pointed out was we serve a God that not only says I love you even though you have anxiety, he came down and felt it. God knows what your mental health issues feel like because Jesus felt that way before he went to the cross, which I think is an incredible humbling thing to hear.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is true. I mean, Jesus experienced all kinds of horrible stuff here as well. But apart from fellowshipping with men and saving the family of the body, the apostles and whatnot, and all the people in the church, the body. But the whole thing, I strongly believe the whole thing about in that scenario, in all things, pray about it, so that the cares will be given unto God, and God will give you peace, all those promises, because Jesus always combated issues with the devil with scripture. When he was tempted in the wilderness, he combated because the scripture says life and death and power and tongue. So there was a time that I had a what do you call it, a comeback, with the demonic stuff, but the scripture says, I have a mind of Christ. So literally I agreed with the truth of God and said, I declared that I have a mind of Christ. I agreed with, and I'm spirit filled, because the aspect of dunamis power is the ability to perform miracles as well. So we partner with God, we go to the Father to do what he shows us to do, so that we do likewise, for freedom, for life, abundant life, so that's I strongly believe in that. I don't know about the whole thing about pharmaceutical drugs, because yes, they're powerful. They can like, I've been through it, twice, and they can shut your brain down. Like, not so much so, because it's with the side effects as well. It shuts down everything. Certain drugs just shuts your whole brain down.
That's why I think it's so important, Donald, when people find a therapist, to find somebody who you're comfortable with, someone you can relate to, that if you have anxiety about drugs, you can bring this up. Like, I think that's what's so important is some people need it. But I think there are some overprescription issues that can happen where, people want a quick fix. So I think you need to go to a therapist where you trust them, but also you can express your concerns like that, where they can ease your concerns, or tell you what's necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
Donald, I want to close it out, but is there any advice you have for anybody who might be struggling with mental health and not feeling comfortable talking about it?
I really don't know about that aspect of talking about it, because it's like, okay, there's bad stuff going down on earth. We know we're in a fallen place, but at the same time, it says meditate on the things above, not the things below, so that is an exercise in itself, a combat of like, it's a constant, take every thought captive, not some, but every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And so the process of renewing the mind, it's a bit of a journey, like, in terms of the truth of what the Word of God said. I mean, not the edited Bible version, but I'm talking about, like, study the Greek, study the Hebrew, and really meditate on those things, because it's like you're literally chewing on it. And the aspect of meditation, it's not the Buddha's way, which is to clear your head and do the breathing exercises, So, it's literally thinking about the Word of God, like, constantly.
Yeah. Well,
So,
thank you very much for sharing, Donald.
thank
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming for this. I know that this is a topic that can be really tough to talk about, and I'd encourage you to listen to the episode, because Tommy is very, very, very open. The only thing I'd want to say is, Tommy does discuss some issues with self-harm and how he dealt with that within his marriage. So if that's something that you struggle with, or might be uncomfortable to listen to or triggering, please be careful going into the episode. But you can find it anywhere podcasts are: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, anywhere you normally get your podcasts. And if you want to have more discussions on this, the podcast page is at I'm a Christian Who podcast, and my page is the Christians Who Curse Sometimes on Instagram. But thank you guys so much for coming, and I hope you all find healing if you're struggling with mental health, and that you learned something through Tommy's story.